Okay, I'm sorry about that. So this is part 3. We will start on this one here. I talked about the whales in the last one. Okay, so here's the fossil will also connect the dots between dinosaurs and birds, and between fish and four-legged animals. So can you tell me what is on the skin of amphibians? Do they have scales? No, they don't. They have usually like some type of slime on them. And what's on the skin of reptiles? That's right, it's scales. And what's on the skin of fish? That's right, it's scales. Then when we get to birds, they have feathers, don't they? Well, if you look at the shape of feathers, let me go ahead and draw this for you. So like if you look at scales, scales kind of go like this, right? On an animal. Well, feathers also do that, don't they? They kind of go like this, and then the next row of feathers, and the next row of feathers. So actually what feathers are modified scales. And then as we go from birds to animals, what happens to the feathers? They don't have scales, they don't have feathers, but they have what? That's right, mammals have fur on them. That's right. So it kind of goes from the slime to scales to feathers to fur. Now, the next area that shows proof for evolution would be anatomy. We'll talk about anatomy and then we'll talk about embryology. But what I want you to do is look at these pictures here and the way the bones are similar. So they have a similar structure. So the blue bones would be similar to the blue bones in the alligator, the chicken, the bird, the chicken and then the mammal. Same thing with this bone up here. On us, that would be our humerus bone if you're looking at our arm. And our arms are very similar to a chicken. This part that's right here, oh, I'm sorry, let me get that. Let me make this a little bigger and then you can be able to see it. I'm sorry, let's do that. Let's do this. I want you to specifically look at the chicken wing. So this part right here would be similar to our humerus bone, our upper arm, right? This part right here would be our forearm. And if you touch your arm, you do have two bones in your forearm. So if you squeeze it, you can probably tell. You have the part that's where your wrist bone is. That right there is your ulna. And then if you remember when we took our radial pulse, that's called the radius. That bone is called the radius. That's right there. Okay. And then, so you got this part here, upper arm, lower arm. And then we don't necessarily have this part right here. Or you could switch those two for us for our forearm. Okay. And then this part here would be where our hands are. Okay. Now, anytime animals have similar structures like that, those similar structure, but it may have a different function. So, for instance, for us, it's our arm. For a bird, it would be their wing. They are called homologous structures. Homologous structures, when they have the same structure but different functions. Now, opposite of that is you have what are called analogous structures. And these is when you have the same function, but they're not put together the same way. So if you've ever seen like a butterfly's wing, that is nowhere near like a bird's wing, because a bird has feathers on it and a butterfly does not. So those would be called analogous structures. Okay? You probably hear my dog drinking water, but okay. So here with the clam shell and the lobster shell, they both have shells and the shells are for protection, aren't they? So they have the same function, but they have a different structure. So they'd be analogous. Now another type of structure would be called vestigial structures. Now vestigial structures are structures that are no longer have a function for an organism. They still have them, but they don't have a structure. They don't have a function. So for example here, this little bird here is called a cormorant. It doesn't fly and it's got these little tiny wings. And these wings would be considered vestigial structures. These right here is the called a skink, and they have little tiny legs, and they don't use their legs. They still kind of move like a snake does. So if I was to say the comment, "You are about as useless as legs on a skink," I would hope that you'd know what I was talking about. Oops. Go to the next one. So why would an organism have structures with little or no function? Well, first of all, in natural selection, there's no reason to have it, but there's also nothing selecting against it. So there's nothing in natural selection that would eliminate an organism with that. And obviously, if the structure does not affect the organism's fitness, it would still could still very well be around. Now here's a human, and I want to point out a couple of vestigial structures that we have. One of them is called Darwin's point on the ear. If this is the shape of your ear, say this is your ear right here, Darwin's point is usually right around this area right here, somewhere around here. So if you feel on your ear, you may be able to feel your Darwin's point. If you're in class, we did find them in class. Another thing are wisdom teeth. We don't need those anymore. Appendix we don't seem to need either, because you can live without that. What about body hair? Do you think we still need body hair? Ear muscles, is there a need for us to be able to move our ears anymore? What about eyebrows? Eyelashes, definitely we still need. Tonsils, maybe not so much. What about nipples on a male? Okay, do you remember why males have nipples? Okay, we talked about that when we did genetics. We kind of talked about that. And last thing is the coccyx. That is your tailbone. And at one point in human development, humans do have tails, believe it or not. It's just that during our development, they shrink up, and all you have left is a tailbone. So that's the anatomy part that kind of shows evolution. Now, embryology is the study of embryos, and you know what an embryo is. After an egg is fertilized, right, it becomes an embryo. Now, if you look at this picture down here, this is each column is a different organism, okay, each column. So on the left would be fish, and all the way on the right would be humans. Now, if you look up here, humans actually have a tail very, very early on in the embryonic development. But as they continue to develop, that tail disappears. And what is end up being left is what? A tailbone. But what I want you to notice is that how all of the animals are very similar. Okay, so this kind of shows that maybe we did have a common ancestor if we all have the same type of development, at least in the beginning. Now, the most wonderful part I would say about this is all the new technology that's come about in the last couple of years through genetics and molecular biology. So we all have the genetic code. Remember, all living organisms have DNA and RNA, and they also all have the same amino acids. If you remember, or nucleotides, I'm sorry. If you think about uracil, which is in the RNA, right? Then thymine, cytosine, guanine, and adenine. I want you to take a look at this comparison of a chimp chromosome and a human one. It's really startling to see how similar now this is just one chromosome. Obviously, all of our chromosomes don't match up this way, but it's really interesting to see, other than this little top part here being different, the rest of it lines up pretty well. The human chromosome's a little bit longer, but it's kind of interesting to see that how it lines up like that, and how the genes are all in the same spots. Now, lastly, I want you to make sure that you know about Rosemary and Peter Grant. They have been working for many, many years. They were actually on 60 Minutes, but they were down in the Galapagos, and they were studying these finches for 35 years. Remember the finches that Darwin saw? If you look at this data table, What's the relationship between the surviving finches surviving and their beak size? You should be able to tell from looking at this graph. That's right. The larger the beak size, the more percentage of birds or finches that will survive. Good. So today, with evolutionary theory, it includes natural selection, and there's insights from all the branches of biology. We talked about biogeography. We talked about paleontology, which was the fossils. We talked about anatomy, embryology, and then molecular biology, which is the genetics, the DNA and RNA, and how all that information helps add to the theory of evolution. And so that's why evolution is called the grand unifying theory of the life sciences. Now, the last couple slides are review questions, and I did give you the answers on those, so I'm not going to go over those on this one.